Hey guys, this is Mark Hutton with AdultAsperger'sChat.com, and today I wanted to talk to people on the autism spectrum and take a deep dive into what I believe is the number one reason that you experience more than your fair share of anxiety. So it starts out like this. When you were younger, assuming that you have high-functioning autism, Asperger's syndrome, ASD level 1, we're calling it different things nowadays. It's very possible that since you did have this developmental disorder, that perhaps your social skills and emotional intelligence didn't rise to the level of your peers, and so perhaps you were ostracized, teased, bullied. Maybe you went undiagnosed, and so your parents just assumed you were naturally defiant or more of a reclusive individual that didn't want to participate in family activities. Maybe the teachers viewed you as a bad student. Maybe you got a job at some point and had a hard time getting along with your fellow employees and even your boss. And now as an adult, you're in a relationship and your neurotypical partner may be complaining about your behavior, lack of empathy, and so on. So anyway, it starts out that we did indeed experience a lot of life stressors, okay, from childhood perhaps. So then we start this negative cycle. I'm just going to call it a negative cycle because it goes downhill from this point forward. So after experiencing a few life stressors, you may have adopted a victim mentality. In other words, you just assume that this is how life is. I'm always on the receiving end of bullying, rejection, ridicule, criticism, and so on. And so you just view yourself as a victim of other people and life in general. And so now with this victim mentality, we begin to scan for more bad news. We're a victim. We just assume we're going to continue to be a victim. And when you scan long enough, as you know, you find bad news. You look for trouble or somebody that's going to disagree with you or somebody that's going to be critical of you. You look for that long enough, you will find that person. So now you have scanned for bad news and you have indeed found it. Now that you have found new bad news, so to speak, or a new stressful situation, you tend to over-focus on that situation. So there could have been 10 good things that happened and one bad thing that happened in a day. And you totally ignore the 10 good things and hyper-focus on the one negative thing. And then from over-focusing on it, now you overreact to it. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe it was a stressor of 4, 10 being bad. But you react to a level 4 stressor as if it were a 10 because now you're getting a cumulative effect of stressors over time, and each stressor, each new stressor, is compounded by previous stressors. So now that I've overreacted to a particular situation or a particular person, and I do this over months and years and years and years, what I end up doing is I turn the event in question into an emotional memory. Think of a time recently when you had a stressful occurrence. Think about it right now. You remember the content, right? You remember what was said, what was done, what the other person said or did. But each time you review that memory, you also have an emotional memory. So you remember what was said and done, but you also remember how you felt during that particular stressful event. So you turn it into an emotional memory. The next thing that happens is, through years of having this negativity bias, we'll call it, you literally sensitize your brain to negativity. In other words, you recognize it quickly, you hyper-focus on it, you react to it negatively, and you also generalize. That's the next step. We generalize. So we've had one incident that happened, and then another incident comes up that's reminiscent of the previous incident, and we think, oh, well, this is going to be the same thing. This is going to turn out badly too. So we just assume that all subsequent events that are even remotely similar to the original stressful event are going to turn out the same way. So now that we are in this state of generalizing, we begin to ignore the positive because the negative occupies more memory space. So you could have 10 things that went well in a day and one bad thing, but we hyper-focus on the one bad thing and totally ignore the other 10 things that were positive. So the next step then is we tend to bring out negativity in others. If you are around somebody who's depressed, it's not long before you're depressed. If you're around somebody who's very angry and resentful, it's not long before you start feeling angry and resentful. Emotions are contagious. And if you have a negative bias, you're going to behave in certain ways at an unconscious level that is going to bring out the negativity in others. When you have a general low-grade negativity and you bring out negativity in others, then you go, see, I knew these people were against me. I knew this was going to turn out badly. So this reinforces our need to scan for more bad news, and the cycle starts all over. So if this cycle sounds reminiscent to you at all, and you feel like you are experiencing more than your fair share of anxiety on a daily basis, you can be assured that that anxiety is coming from a lot of toxic, destructive, negative inner commentary or self-talk. A meltdown can be viewed as consisting of three phases. There's the escalation of anxiety, the explosion of pent-up anxiety, and post-explosion. Together, they make up the meltdown cycle. In this process, the escalation phase is characterized by cues that indicate anxiety is building. Now, these cues can be physical, behavioral, emotional, or cognitive, and they are warning signs or responses to anxiety-provoking events. Events, on the other hand, are situations that occur every day that may lead to escalations of anxiety if effective anxiety control methods are not used. Red flag events are types of situations that are unique to you and that you are especially sensitive to because of past events. And these events can involve internal processes, for example, thinking about situations that were anxiety-provoking in the past, or external processes, for example, experiencing real-life anxiety-provoking situations in the here and now. If the escalation phase is allowed to continue, the explosion phase will follow. Now, the explosion phase is marked by an uncontrollable discharge of anxiety displayed as verbal or physical aggression. Now, this discharge in turn leads to negative consequences, and it's synonymous with the number 10 on an emotional dysregulation meter. You could think of this meter as similar to a thermometer. The final stage of the meltdown cycle is the post-explosion phase, and it's characterized by negative consequences that resulted from the verbal or physical aggression that was displayed during the explosion phase. These consequences could include feelings of guilt, shame, regret, a post-meltdown shutdown. In other words, he explodes and then later on he goes and hibernates and isolates and tries to stay away from people. Separation or divorce, family members and friends that no longer want to be around you, being terminated from a job, and in some cases even going to jail. Now, the intensity, frequency, and duration of anxiety in a meltdown cycle varies among individuals. For example, one person's anxiety may escalate rapidly after a provocative event and within just a few minutes reach the explosion phase. Another's anxiety may escalate slowly but steadily over several hours before reaching the explosion phase. So it will be important to understand your pattern here. In other words, do you go from 1 to 100 miles an hour quickly, or do you creep up from 1 mile an hour to 100 miles an hour over the course of several minutes or even up to an hour? Also, one may experience more episodes of anxiety and progress through the meltdown cycle more often than the other. However, both people, despite differences in how quickly their anxiety escalates and how frequently they experience anxiety, will undergo all three phases of the meltdown cycle. The intensity of anxiety from one person to the next also will be different. One person may engage in more violent behavior than the other in the explosion phase. For example, he might assault someone. The other person may express his anxiety during the explosion phase by shouting at or threatening another person. But regardless of these individual differences, the explosion phase is synonymous with losing control and becoming verbally or physically aggressive, and we call this emotional dysregulation. Another term that is used but doesn't quite capture the severity of this situation is low frustration tolerance. Now, notice that the escalation and explosion phases of the meltdown cycle correspond to the levels on the emotional dysregulation meter. The points below 10 on the meter represent the escalation phase, or the building up of anxiety. The explosion phase, on the other hand, corresponds to 10 on this meter. And it is kind of an imaginary meter at this point. So again, 10 on the meter is the point at which one loses control and expresses anxiety through verbal or physical aggression that leads to negative consequences. One of the primary objectives of anxiety control treatment is to keep from reaching the explosion phase. And this is accomplished by using the emotional dysregulation meter to monitor changes in your anxiety, attending to the cues or warning signs that indicate anxiety is building, and employing the appropriate methods from your anxiety control plan to stop escalation. If the explosion phase is prevented from occurring, the post-explosion phase will not occur and the meltdown cycle will be broken. So if you use your anxiety control plan effectively, your anxiety should ideally reach between a 1 and a 9 on the emotional dysregulation meter. By preventing the explosion phase, which is a 10, you will not experience the same level of negative consequences of the post-explosion phase, and you will then be able to break the destructive cycle. My husband, on the autism spectrum, he has high functioning autism, is very stubborn and is often angry. He also has severe anxiety. Is it possible that the anxiety is causing him to act out in various ways? Well, the short answer to that would be yes, pretty much 100% of the time. A common theme does exist among people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism, specifically their tendency to exhibit both behavioral and cognitive rigidity, which spouses often perceive as stubbornness and being insensitive, selfish, uncaring, narcissistic, and numerous other adjectives. But the behavioral and cognitive rigidity that gets perceived as just rude behavior is definitely a response to anxiety. There's a strong correlation between anxiety and inflexibility, and that can be evident at home, and it also can be evident in the workplace. So a vulnerability to anxiety is definitely an intrinsic feature of Asperger's or high-functioning autism, and that's due to three different things, really. It's due to a specific neurotransmitter system defect. It's also due to a breakdown in circuitry related to extinguishing fear responses. And it's also a secondary consequence of the individual's inability to make appropriate social judgments. So there's numerous factors at play that increase anxiety in people on the autism spectrum. I could spend the next hour talking about that, but I'll try to keep this answer fairly short. A lack of empathy significantly limits skills for autonomous social problem solving. For example, the individual is unaware in many cases that he has said hurtful things or behaved in inappropriate ways. And this results in him, we'll use the example of an NT wife and the husband with autism. This behavior that he exhibits often gets him in trouble with his wife. I work with men on the autism spectrum a lot, and it seems like they all say, yeah, they're in the doghouse, and they feel like they're always in trouble. So this all relates to a lack of empathy, or we will call it a lack of displayed empathy. They have empathy, they just don't necessarily display it. And this limits skills for autonomous social problem solving. Social problem solving, that's an important term to remember. Limitations in generalizing from one situation to another often contribute to in this case, the autistic husband repeating the same social mistakes over and over again. If he gets into a heated argument with his NT wife over a specific problem, and and she conveys to him what he needs to do differently next time, he will get it with that specific problem. But if there's a second problem that's just slightly different, he may not necessarily be able to generalize from the first problem to the second problem. Also, another factor that is at play that increases anxiety is the individual's inability to grasp social cues, facial expressions, body language, and so on. So this creates a lot of repeated social errors because he's misinterpreting what is being expressed to him. Social limitations also make it difficult for him to develop coping strategies to soothe himself and to contain difficult emotions. And so those are just a few. There's many more. The circumstances that raise the anxiety level for people on the autism spectrum often result in their increased need to control people, places, and things. This need for control takes the form of rigidity, which is what you were referring to in your question as stubbornness. So there's behavioral rigidity and cognitive rigidity. Behavioral rigidity refers to the person's difficulty in maintaining appropriate behavior in new and unfamiliar situations. Okay? And then there's cognitive rigidity, and this occurs when the individual is unable to consider alternatives to the current situation, alternative viewpoints, or innovative solutions to a problem. People with rigid thinking do tend to view situations in either or terms. It's either right or wrong, good, bad, black, white. They want concrete black and white answers, and the gray areas of life are often very uncomfortable for people with behavioral and cognitive rigidity. Symptoms of rigidity often introduce some of the most disruptive chronic behaviors exhibited by people on the autism spectrum. For example, aggression, difficulties tolerating changes in routine, dislike of changes to plans that have been previously laid out. You may have experienced with your partner on the spectrum his or her meltdowns, frustration, shutdowns, and problems with minor differences in the environment. I get a lot of feedback from NT wives that say they feel that they're always walking on eggshells in an effort to circumvent any extreme reaction from their very brittle Asperger's husband. In addition, the husband himself may articulate his anxiety over fears that things will not go according to plan or that he'll be forced to make changes that he can't handle. Sometimes these behaviors are identified as obsessive compulsive because of the husband's need for ritualized order or non-functional routine. In other words, he has a strong need for sameness. So, as one can easily imagine, behavioral and cognitive rigidity causes many problems in relationships, which usually result in a higher level of anxiety for the person on the autism spectrum. Therefore, this cycle just continues at that point. Since my social intelligence and emotional intelligence is low, I have a hard time reading body language, facial cues, tone of voice, volume of voice, filling in between the lines when somebody's somewhat vague. Since I have this mind blindness issue where I'm not really sure what people's motives are, I'm not really sure what's going on inside of their thinking process, I'm not really sure what they're feeling in their heart, I'm not really sure what they're planning. I have a hard time predicting outcomes based on this misinformation that I'm getting because I have this mind blindness thing. So what ends up happening is I'm always in a state of confusion because I never really totally know what the hell is going on. And I'm like dodging paintballs all day. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is this person thinking or what are they feeling? Is it my fault? Is it something else? And there's this guesswork that goes on all goddamn day long. And so since you're in a constant state of confusion, And guesswork, as you well can imagine, causes a lot of anxiety. Because I never know what the hell's going on. I'm always trying to guess what's going on. So I am literally in a heightened state of anxiety to one degree or another. I'm never not anxious unless I'm engaging in my special interest. But for the most part, I'm in some form of anxiety all day long. What do I do when I'm anxious 24/7? I probably even have anxious dreams. So what do I do in that case? I engage in anxiety reduction. Since I'm anxious all the time, I do as many things as I know how to reduce my anxiety. But I have found in many cases the individual's anxiety reduction techniques at the very best only work temporarily, and in many cases not even temporarily. But in most cases, the anxiety reduction techniques, which would be anger, rage, shutdowns, meltdowns, whatever, I mean, the list is long. Their anxiety reduction technique actually increases the anxiety. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutton with AdultAsperger'sChat.com, and today I have a message for men on the autism spectrum who are married to a neurotypical wife, and I want to discuss with you briefly what I'm going to call the anxiety scale for risky conversations. Now, the reason I say risky conversations is because there's times when she wants to approach you and talk to you about something that's important to her, but it may be a little on the heavy side or loaded with some emotionality on her part, and so you are at risk of doing some version of a shutdown or a meltdown. And as she talks, the longer it goes, the more your anxiety comes up, and so we want to let her know, you want to let her know on a scale of 1 to 5 where your anxiety is. So the anxiety scale ranges from 1 to 5, 1 being very low anxiety with 5 being very high. Now, you'll want to use this scale when she's talking to you about important and perhaps even stressful topics. So as she is delivering her message, you are keeping a check on your anxiety level and where you're at on that scale, 1 being low, 5 being high. Now, when you feel that in your estimation you've hit a level 3, you are going to have difficulty listening, understanding, and retaining her information, and you're going to be at risk of experiencing some version of a meltdown or shutdown or false agreement. False agreement is simply when you agree with her just to hurry up and get the conversation over with. So at level 3, it would be best for you to call a timeout, but let her know this is not a shutdown. You can say, I'm at a level 3, I'm having a hard time retaining your information. Your information is important to you, so it's important to me too, but I need to take a brief timeout so I can get back down to level 1 on my anxiety scale. Okay, so you're letting her know this is a timeout, not a shutdown, and we will resume this discussion. Now, this is going to help you avoid shutdowns and meltdowns because it breaks up her sometimes rather large message into smaller, more manageable bite-sized chunks. So let's say you've hit level 3. You let her know, I'm not tracking your information very well now. Let me go take a timeout. I'll come back when I'm at level 1. You come back down to level 1. You let her know, I'm ready to continue this conversation. And when you come back for round 2, if you hit level 3 again, just repeat the process. As long as she knows that this is a timeout designed to help you listen, understand, and retain her message, she's probably going to be open to that. As long as she knows this is not an excuse to have a shutdown and to avoid the topic. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutton with AdultAsperger'sChat.com, and I wanted to talk to the men out there on the autism spectrum who have anxiety. And if you're like most, as in like 100% of other people on the autism spectrum, anxiety just comes with the territory, right? But I don't want you to view anxiety as altogether a bad thing. Actually, there's a part of anxiety that is a good thing, even a survival mechanism. Now, we certainly don't want to have anxiety over everything all the time, but we are designed to have some anxiety over some things some of the time. So anxiety is actually a call to action. If you have some unresolved anxiety in your relationship, your anxiety is telling you that there is something not working quite right and change needs to happen. So it's good that you have some anxiety. If you don't have anxiety, you're either dead or you're a psychopath. And if you're listening to this video, you're not dead. And if you're not in prison, chances are pretty good you're not a psychopath. The message today is for you to view some of your anxiety as a call to action. It's a message that your brain is trying to send to you saying something is not functioning the way it can be and we need to change it. On that note, I have a men's group coming up for people on the autism spectrum who are having trouble in their relationships, and you don't have to have a formal diagnosis to join this group. So check it out, click on the link below. So today I want to talk about how to reduce your relationship stress. This is specifically for people on the autism spectrum, although it can certainly apply to the neurotypical partners as well. But in order to help you reduce your relationship anxiety, we have to talk about scattered thinking, because scattered thinking is the number one source of your anxiety. And scattered thinking looks exactly like this. It's thoughts that we have in the past and in the future. Thoughts in the past would be ruminations and regrets. Ruminations would be where you play the movie in your mind about the hurtful things that the other person said or did, or maybe they didn't follow through with something you wanted them to say or do. Regrets would be the things that you said or did that you wish you had not, or maybe things that you wish you had followed through with but you did not. Also in the past, we have neutral reflections and positive reflections. A neutral reflection would simply be remembering something in the past that wasn't good, bad, right, or wrong. You were just kind of indifferent about it. It happened, and it's not a big deal. Positive reflection is pleasant memories of something that happened in the past, something that somebody said or did that was quite nice. Another way we have scattered consciousness is dealings with the future. So that would include worry, which is you're overly concerned about what somebody might say or do, or you're overly concerned that the person will not follow through with something that you do want to be said or done. And then we have neutral anticipation, which is expecting something to happen that's not good, bad, right, or wrong. You're kind of indifferent about it. For example, you expect to go to work tomorrow. And then we have positive anticipation, which is you're looking forward to something that might happen or that you know will definitely happen. For example, you have a planned vacation next month. So this is how we get lost in the past and in the future, which by default removes us from the present moment. We're no longer in the here and now. We're lost in our head. And with ruminations and regrets about the past, alongside worries about the future, your anxiety goes up, 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 which makes it even more unlikely that you will be able to be present in the moment, focusing on the here and now. So of these different forms of consciousness, we want to keep the positive reflections, we want to keep the positive anticipations, and we want to throw in the third and most important one, which is being here now, being focused on the present moment, being mindful of what's going on with your breathing, with your body, with the task at hand, instead of getting lost in a negative sense in the past or the future. So, in summary, to reduce your anxiety, you're going to make your consciousness less scattered, which means you're going to focus on positive reflection, positive anticipation, and being in the present moment. Those three and those three alone. Hey, this is Mark Hutton. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.